Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new collaboration project between Big Sean and Jhené Aiko called 2088. Have to be honest, when I first heard about this project, I honestly thought it was a joke. I mean, it came out on April Fool's Day. That had to be a possibility, right? Because by now you should all know how I feel about these two artists. But in case you don't, or if you're new here, Jhené Aiko is probably the one with whom you're a little bit less familiar. If you do remember her, it's probably from being the best part of that god-awful Omarion and Chris Brown track from last year, Post to Be. Although that really isn't saying much to her credit, given that track landed on my top 10 worst hit songs of 2015. And what made it so much worse and so much more disappointing is that just a year earlier, Jhené Aiko was an R&B star that I was entirely behind, writing out a few pretty songs and EPs to her debut album Sold Out, which is one of my favorite R&B albums of the 2010s. Smart, beautifully performed and produced, it had so much goddamn promise and potential, and it did precisely nothing on the charts in terms of singles, even though the album did end up selling better than you would expect. So look, I get it if Jhené Aiko wanted to network and get a big boost for her career, but did it have to be with Big Sean of all people? Those of you who saw my Dark Sky Paradise review from last year know that I'm no fan of this guy, who somehow manages to squander the backing and production of Kanye West with some of the corniest and most sloppily written bars that you'll find in mainstream hip-hop. I'm not gonna deny he's made a few songs that I like, but of the songs I don't like, to quote my buddy Anthony Fantano, no. So on that promising note, I guess I shouldn't even be surprised that Jhené Aiko and Big Sean are apparently longtime friends, even if it does kind of depress me a bit. It's like remembering that Ariana Grande used to date Big Sean, and that he also dated Naya Rivera from Glee. Just makes me so sad for every woman involved. They can do so much better than Big Sean. But you know, enough tabloid nonsense. Apparently Jhené Aiko and Big Sean put together a project, and I debated even covering it, given that it's technically considered an EP, and I don't normally cover EPs. But then again, it is a half hour long. Jhené Aiko clearly saw something in this project that's worthwhile, and to Big Sean's credit, he has slowly been becoming a better rapper. So I decided to check out 2088. How'd it go? Well, here's the funny thing about this project. There's gonna be a lot of people who are checking out this album because they know Big Sean, and yet it's not a project that plays to many of his obvious characteristics and strengths, namely his humor or his occasional pile-up of bars. I get the impression that this is much more driven by Jhené Aiko in terms of the production and especially the writing, and yet it doesn't feel like a record that was made for Big Sean in mind at all. As such, it doesn't really play to either artist's strengths quite as well as it should. The sort of project that has moments and even some subtext and nuance if you read between the lines, but doesn't really measure up to what it could have been. Good, maybe even decent, but pretty far away from great if I'm being honest. So let's start off with Big Sean, and I'll be completely honest here, even though I'm not a fan of the guy, this is probably the most consistently structured his bars have ever been. With rare exception, the song's 2-minute warning and Memories Faded as Big Sean again crams too many words into haphazard cadences that don't sound good. His flows for the most part hold together, and they actually rhyme for once. And that technical proficiency lets him focus more on his delivery and emotive control, because this is an album that demands subtlety, something you wouldn't expect from Big Sean, and I'll give him points for really trying, especially toward the ending of this record on London Bridge, where the sentiments kind of lean into his corniness and actually makes it come across as somewhat heartfelt. I believed it. And yet on the flip side, he's just as convincing when blasting girls that stand him up or put him on blast, like on Selfish or Talk Show. Yeah, it's bitter and unattractive, but in the context of the album, it kind of works. And yet the midpoint of this record, okay, you need to be able to believe that Big Sean could in a million years hook up with Jhené Aiko, and yet when it comes to sexuality and poise, she's just on a different level than him. More melodic and smooth, but just as capable of real emotive complexity that can be just as cruel. She's capable not just of more range, but real subtlety, and you get the impression, both from the flows that Big Sean hops on, and Jhené Aiko's own press statements, that she probably would have much preferred to get Drake opposite her on this EP, which would have felt like a much more even match, at least in my opinion. It certainly would have helped the sung portions, because while Big Sean doesn't really embarrass himself in the harmonies, he's not exactly adding much to these parts either. You probably could swap out any interchangeable R&B vocalists and they do just fine here. Granted, I'm not sure the production does them any favors either, because it tries to meet in the middle between Big Sean and Jhené Aiko and doesn't completely flatter either. I did appreciate the Matt Zoe sample flipped with real bass and guitar on Selfish, the dark bassy swell of the gleaming fragments and the sex jam of Push It, which worked way better than I was expecting, the flipped soul sample from the Natural 4 on Talk Show that ebbs gets darker as the track proceeds into uglier territory, or the watery backing melody that builds up the faded swell of strings and rumbling darker beat on London bridges with a really great outro. But look, when Jhené Aiko released Sold Out, the main producer behind it was No ID. For a layer of depth and texture that the producers here, they really can't match, especially in the cymbals, which vary from the very brittle but clean tone on Memories Faded to a much dirtier, rougher sound on Deja Vu. And that's where we get to the backing vocals, most of which are wedged through a cavalcade of cheaply compressed vocal effects that don't nearly blend as well as they should. The worst case being the mess of 2-minute warning, with Detail, Casey, and JoJo contributing more backing vocals to an already overloaded song, especially with that thin gurgle of synth that does not sound good. But the larger issue is that for as many times as I've gone through this album, none of the instrumentation really jumped off the page to stand out much melodically. It's good, it's cohesive, it contributes well, but nothing that grabbed me in the same way that standalone Big Sean or Jhené Aiko instrumentals and their tracks have done in the past. It's not quite reaching the sum of their parts. Now this leaves us the content and themes, the question of this album's narrative, if there even is one. And that assumes that you managed to get past the clunky lines from both artists. Big Sean inevitably fails the worst as he describes how he micromanages sex, or with the mall cops reference on Talk Show that comes out of nowhere, and with Jhené Aiko mixing up her sports metaphors to confusing football and baseball, or cutting off her flow mid-bar on Memories Faded to tell Big Sean to come screw her in the car. But you know what, reading past all those, pretty hard I know, you could see a bit of a narrative to this album, with Deja Vu opening with Big Sean and Jhené Aiko reminiscing over a phone call that actually plays out with some believable chemistry. Hell, if we're looking for the one element that makes this project worth any listens, it definitely comes through in the chemistry between these two artists. They flow off each other pretty well, and many of the stark parallels between them, particularly in their flaws, because despite how self-assured, open, sexually potent, and decidedly plain-spoken they are, they're also both selfish, jealous, arrogant, overdramatic, and they have no problem airing each other's dirty laundry in public, as we see on Stark Detail on Talk Show, where they both out each other cheating. And you know what? That kind of works given that it's framed that they're both in the wrong here. On some level, a relationship between them would be absolute hell. The album knows that, something I get the feeling that Jhené Aiko knows all along, and even Big Sean grasps on one of the better metaphors on the album on Push It. The foundation of the relationship is Jhené Aiko and heels, representative of the sex keeping them together, but just as precarious. As such, you could read the hookup and then collapse of the relationship as part of an arc. Probably one that has happened many times before. Something, by the way, that holds a lot in common with a similar circular process that took place on Sold Out. And while London Bridges might show a way out for them, a sincere confession of love from both partners, both their penchants for the melodramatic definitely comes through in describing their relationship failing like a catastrophe, when really nothing in the presentation or writing would indicate that it's anything that hasn't happened plenty of times before, at least between these two. And indeed, that's probably why I'm a little bit lukewarm on this project and not as hot as I want to be, even though it is better than I expected. In repeating a similar structural conceit to Sold Out, it ends up feeling kind of slight to me because the writing gives no indication that anything has really changed or any revelation has been reached by either artist. And that would be fine if the dramatic situation had more weight or power and actually amped up the bombast. But by keeping things low-key, it frames the situation with subtlety and drama that is pulled off in the performances, but the writing doesn't really get all the way there. Maybe this project might have benefited from a little bit more length to flesh out the story or show the aftershocks of the situation to people that are around them, but the brevity and very tight focus to the couple never lets it expand that far, leaving 2088 feeling like a test run more than a fully formed project. I get why this is an EP. That said, there are moments I like. Jhené Aiko is on point as always, and it's probably the most compelling that Big Sean has ever been with the most consistent writing, so I'm thinking light 6 out of 10 and a recommendation, especially if you're a fan of either artist. Just be sure to adjust your expectations here. But then again, if this gets Jhené Aiko more traction or has helped Big Sean develop a little bit more subtlety or complexity or lyrical tact as an artist, I'm definitely intrigued for the follow-up. So yeah, good work. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm working my way through that backlog, but if there's anything else coming out you want me to take a look at, I will try to find a spot for it. And if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Beyond that, I got the poll over here. What did you guys think of this album? Do you think that the combination of the two of them managed to come together better than I expected? Well, it was halfway decent, I'll give them that. Beyond that, until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.